Thank you. Thanks for coming, and I know all of you are probably anxious about the impending snowstorm, so thank you for coming. I know everyone's probably heading immediately home or to the airport after this. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our panel, and as Tom mentioned in his opening remarks, we are trying to do the exact opposite of a typical Washington panel. Not that those are bad. If you've ever been to or watched or experienced an entrepreneurship or startup day competition, they're pitch competitions, they're demo days. And so we thought it might be fun in the context of talking about spurring entrepreneurship through federal policy if we had a pitch competition for policy ideas. And as Tom mentioned, we have our Washington Wonks who are going to be pitching different ideas, one idea each, and we tried to underscore the importance of discipline with their policy pitches. So they each have 4 minutes, and we asked them to focus on the details of the idea, what it would do, its impact, but also to really focus on its feasibility. Not sort of a pie in the sky, wouldn't it be nice if idea, but something that could get done tomorrow or next week. And the pundits have the enviable job of judging, of probing, of asking questions, and hopefully developing new ideas. We certainly anticipate that with the ideas and the discussion and the questions from you, there will be a lot of new material generated. And so we hope to publish a policy brief next week that sort of captures all the ideas and discussions from this event. So there'll be 6 minutes of discussion, and after the judges do their work, the pundits do their work, the audience will vote. And there's a URL, and we'll open online voting. And the winner gets nothing. You get pride for your idea being chosen. From our Washington Wonks, we have Donald Marin from the Urban Institute, Will Marshall from the Progressive Policy Institute, Megan McCardle from Bloomberg, and there are placards on the table outside with the title and promoting Megan's new book, which is just out or just about to be out. That's very exciting. On our policy pundits for our judges, we have Bo Cutter, a senior fellow from the Roosevelt Institute, Rana Foroohar from Time Magazine, and if you didn't read it, she had a wonderful interview and profile of the new Fed chair, Janet Yellen, about a month ago. Sort of helps set the stage for a lot of the issues that are going to be discussed today. And finally, Chris Schroeder, an investor and entrepreneur who is the author of another recent book called Startup Rising about entrepreneurship in the Middle East. And if you haven't read it, go immediately after this on your way home and buy it. It is fantastic and really is eye-opening for entrepreneurship outside the U.S. and what's really going on out there. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Josh Mendelsohn, the co-founder of Engine, an advocacy group for tech startups, which is doing just terrific work here in Washington. And Josh is going to be the moderator and is going to enforce the time limits for today. So Josh?
All right, thank you very much, Dane. So we are going to stick to the rules that Dane mentioned. This is a tough competition, and there's a big ego prize to be had. So let's do this right. Our very first pitch is going to come from Donald from the Urban Institute, who is going to talk to us about a new startup visa. You ready?
Sure. I'm happy to be the guinea pig for this fun thing. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for having me. Let me start with opportunity, right? So the opportunity is that entrepreneurs create enormous value for society, for customers, for workers, for the communities in which they live. And so the opportunity is to think about ways to attract more entrepreneurs, have more entrepreneurs in our nation. The problem, which we didn't coordinate this, but Tom mentioned it in his opening remarks, is that we have outdated immigration rules that actually make it quite difficult for foreign-born immigrants to come here and start new businesses. If you think about the traditional H-1B visa, it has a tendency to tie you to a particular employer, but if you wake up one morning and have an idea for starting a new thing, it's difficult for you to extract yourself from that. Or if you have a student visa, you have a brilliant new Mark Zuckerberg-like idea, going out and starting a business may be difficult for you. And so as a result, right, the downside of that is that we have foreign-born entrepreneurs who in principle want to and could create new things here in the United States, but because it's difficult for them to do it, some give up, some go to other more welcoming nations like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and some choose to do it in their home countries.
All right, so you gave us the problem. Now what's your solution?
Right, so the solution is to update our immigration laws and create specifically a visa program targeted to entrepreneurs, commonly known as a startup visa. The idea would be to give a visa, to give a path to permanent residence in the United States to folks who are really plausible entrepreneurs who are going to try to create and succeed in creating new businesses here in the United States. What you would need is kind of a first 2-year window or so where folks would submit a business plan that would be sufficient to get them qualified to come in and try to start up their businesses. And then over time, they would be able to stay and eventually get permanent residence if they achieved various goals in terms of either raising revenue, raising investment capital, or hiring workers. And you'd want to give them various ways for doing that, right? We know, for example, that revenue alone isn't a perfect metric because it might make sense to have very little revenue for a couple of years. But if you can track some outside capital, that would be a good sign that you're serious. You'd obviously need some rules in there so that this doesn't become a loophole-y kind of thing, right? This is Washington. Some of you are already planning out there how to game the system, right? So you'd need some hurdles to make sure that the investment money you raise is from real investors. But the idea is to provide that kind of visa for new entrepreneurs.
How do we get it done in DC?
See, trick question, because actually the third question is the benefits, isn't it?
Who benefits?
Okay.
Who benefits? But I think you've addressed who benefits.
Oh, well, but I'm going to do the who benefits anyway. I got my 4 minutes. So if we succeed, right, if we have new entrepreneurs here creating new things, couple things to know. And some of this research, some of this knowledge has come from Kauffman-funded research. So the first is we know that immigrants are systematically more likely to be the founders of organizations, right? They've often come here through other routes. I was reading today about Elon Musk, who knew he wanted to be an American entrepreneur and figured out that the way to do it, he started off as a South African citizen, and the trick was to first become a Canadian citizen and then use that as a bench, right? We don't want people to have to go through those hurdles, but we'd like to attract the Elon Musks who will create new things that benefit consumers, create new jobs. I should emphasize the fiscal side, right? If you attract new high-skilled folks here who are doing these kinds of things, there'll be a benefit for society. This is not a coster, this is a saver from a budget point of view. And it's also something that would help maintain our competitiveness and, again, have these folks developing these businesses here in the US rather than elsewhere. And then how do we get it done? You know, so in a perfect world, we ought to do comprehensive immigration reform. Folks have been trying that for 6-8 years now up on the Hill. There are lots of challenges in immigration about unauthorized folks who are already here in the United States and deserve attention, about ways of reforming H-1B visas and other visa programs. So there's a lot to be said for doing comprehensive immigration reform, and having a startup visa be part of that would be great. In fact, it is in fact part of the Senate bill that passed last year. If that isn't possible, though, I would say that we ought to pursue a plan B, think about what you could do in terms of an economic growth package that would be able to get through Congress that would include the startup visa as a piece of it. Thanks.
Sounds great. All right, so now we've got our policy thinkers. We won't roll with pundits. You've got 6 minutes to fire away.
Do each of us have 6?
6 total.
That's starting to
Respect each other.
Starting to drool.
Well, but I'll yield my time to you if you feel that enthusiastic.
No. Don, we have to approach this from not from the perspective that everything is a free good, that you just do something because it kind of sounds like a nice idea, that there has to be some sense of impact because it takes effort to do it. And while I'm shocked by your notion that people would game something in this nice city, who's going to do the, I'm interested in the selection process. Is that well-known entrepreneurial institute, the visa part of the State Department, going to choose these folks?
Right, so you focused in immediately on what would be the weakest part of this. And I should note, part of the solution to this is to, one thing we are bad at doing in Washington that we need to do a better job of is to learn from the experience of other nations. And so we would not be a first mover here. So there's an opportunity to look at what the Australias, New Zealands, Chiles, and Singapores of the world are doing and trying to figure out how do you have a streamlined approach. And I will be full disclosure, we have somewhat failed before on this. There is a thing called an EB-5 visa, which is an investor-oriented visa. It's not entrepreneur. You've got to have the $1 million yourself to invest in a business. And that is a little bit of a logistical nightmare and has not succeeded. Some folks have gotten in, but very few. You need a much more streamlined approach. And I think the way to do it, frankly, is to have a relatively simple process for just kind of, looking at a business plan, making sure it passes an initial smell test, and recognizing that after 2 years, people are going to have to show you something that's tangible and measurable, whether it's revenues, whether it's outside investment. There's a challenge in defining what a qualified investor is to get the hurdle, but obviously if you get something from a VC, if you get money from an experienced angel, if you get someone who's invested in 5 other businesses and not just as a friend of yours who is investing in you to keep you in the country, right, those kind of hurdles I think can help you screen people who are sincere and real.
Should I fire?
Keep going.
Okay, great. So first of all, I love the idea, totally support the idea of more immigration. I'll come clean and say I'm the daughter of a Turkish immigrant who studied in this country and then started a business. And that is the basis of my question, which is sort of questioning the premise of the idea. I'm curious if there's data, really good data, on the percentage of would-be entrepreneurs or folks that are coming out of universities who would actually like to stay here or who are planning to go abroad anyway, because I think that the environment has shifted, and I think that we're facing, the rise of the rest, headwinds in that way that may be different and may require some more advanced policy thinking around this idea.
So this is an area, obviously, where the data are poor. It's hard to know, and lots to be said for improving data availability. We are, to be honest here, there's a lot of anecdotes of individual entrepreneurs who've tried to get through the process, have had difficulty and failed. We do know from the H-1B program that you get occasional spikes where the program is completely overwhelmed, which gives us a sense that at least the demand for high-skilled folks more broadly sometimes greatly exceeds the available supply, and we'd be able to bring in more folks. I'm somewhat comfortable with the idea of running policy experiments and seeing. Right, so let's find out what demand is. Again, I don't think the existing investor program has been a fair test because it's been so difficult and so poorly designed. And we will find out the answer. The Kauffman folks did a study a little while back where they estimated that in principle, they considered a case where you might have 75,000 new entrepreneurs come in. And whether that's plausible or not isn't, to be honest, entirely clear, but I think it's worth a shot to find out.
We've got exactly 2 minutes.
I'm not worried about the demand side, I have to tell you, from what I've seen, even though people want to stay home as well as come here too, so I congratulate you on thinking about it. Having watched the demise, well, not yet the demise, but H-1B visa getting squashed in the broader immigration reform debate, how are you thinking about the tactical approach to pull something out like this that won't get lost in that broader discussion? To me, is everything. And one thing I was always curious is, could you frame this as a jobs thing? Then everyone has to vote for it because it becomes a job thing. But if you were to require these immigrants to say, you'll stay here for 3 years if you hire 15 or more people or whatever, is there a way to think of it in some kind of framing that could get you out of the noise?
Yes, I think there's a double way you can frame it as a jobs thing, kind of an affirmative, offensive way or a positive way, and kind of a defensive way. So the defensive is that a lot of the concern about H-1Bs is substituting for workers who would otherwise be hired and competing, which in a weak labor market, even if it might still make sense in some grand economic sense, is a much harder sell when you have high unemployment and there are challenges out there. With entrepreneurs, it's a little different because there's not an obvious person that they're replacing in the US labor market. They're trying something new, which almost by definition means, at least directly, they're not substituting. Obviously, indirectly, they might be. And then the other is exactly as you described, is you could have one of the key qualifications for the 2-year hurdle, the 5-year hurdle, to be that you employ 4 or 5 people, which is exactly what the Senate bill does.
All right.
I have a follow-up.
Follow-ups, perfect.
I don't think you solved the selection problem, so I'll go back to it and propose an alternative. What if you sold tradable rights and visas to venture firms?
So I will admit I have not thought about that, and I'm not fast enough to quickly analyze it. So, I mean, just my first reaction is, okay, how are you going to define a venture firm? Because, as you know, right, the pocket of things that go through venture firms is only a small slice of American entrepreneurialism, and that angels fund a bunch of interesting things, and frankly, there's a certain fraction of people who bootstrap, and so you'd be only getting a sliver of what is the potential out there. I am quite sympathetic, though, being a budget guy by original training, to things that involve people, sending in some money to the United States in return for something that will make the economy stronger, that has that win-win attribute to it.
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Right, thanks.
All right. So as a reminder for folks, because we didn't really get to this at the beginning, but our wonks were asked to answer 4 questions. So the first is, what's the problem and that you're trying to solve for? What's your solution? Some measure of, what's the value, who's going to benefit, and how are we going to get it done. So with that, we're going to switch over to Will. So we have Will Marshall from the Progressive Policy Institute, who is going to talk with us about yet more reforms.
Okay, thanks. Well, first, kudos to Dane and Kauffman. It's about time we had a American Idol for wonks. I don't know why it took so long to think of it. My topic is regulatory reform, not a terribly sexy one, but we think that the meta issue here is this: America's stuck in a slow growth trap. It's a structural, not a cyclical problem. We have to get out of it. And there's no way to get us on a high growth path that doesn't include improving a busted, broken regulatory system. And the principal problem, not the only one, but a principal problem of our regulatory system is regulatory accumulation, the layering on year after year of new rules atop old rules. And again, we're not talking about bad rules, dumb rules, ill-conceived or designed ones necessarily, although some may be. What we're really talking about is just the buildup, just the sheer volume of rules. Because in Washington, the fundamental problem isn't that agencies promulgate new rules. We're going to do that as long as we have crises to which politicians are going to respond. The fundamental problem is that we just never rescind old rules.
All right, so moving on.
The solution, in our view, is something called the Regulatory Improvement Commission. And this is a pure steal, a borrow from the Base Closing Commission. Back in 1990, Congress created to wind down a lot of obsolete military infrastructure after the end of the Cold War. It's one of the most successful commissions Congress ever, maybe the most successful one ever impaneled. And the idea here is to get an independent group of people, not a monstrous new bureaucracy. We're talking about 8 people in an independent advisory board who come together periodically to prune the regulatory garden, not to engage in wholesale deregulation. And this group would would have an open source, would solicit from the public, from business, from other stakeholders, ideas for regulations that were duplicative, in conflict with each other, obsolete, that should be put on the chopping block for either elimination or modification, and present a list of, say, 15 to 20 of these rules to Congress for an up or down vote, just as the Base Closing Commission did.
So let's talk about the benefits.
Well, the benefit of this, I think, is that it creates a politically viable way to begin to trim this burden of regulatory accumulation, reduce the regulatory drag on entrepreneurs, on people starting new businesses, and on current businesses. It does not require conservatives who always put the modifier job killing before the word regulation. It doesn't require them to ideologically capitulate. And unfortunately, on our side, many progressives are inclined to defend all rules as reflexively as conservatives attack them. So you have this terrible polarity, and what we need is a politically trustworthy mechanism that, again, allows us to go after rules periodically and in a manageable way begin to wind them down. And we think that just as the Base Commission model gave political cover to members who otherwise would have had to vote individually to vote the Presidio or some base in some powerful congressman's district, that never would have happened. We never would have gotten the result if we hadn't put these all in a bundle and gone after them en masse.
So how are we going to get it done?
Well, it's already being done. That's the good news. We have a bill in the Senate for a Regulatory Improvement Commission that Senators Angus King and Roy Blunt have put in. I guess that makes it bipartisan. King's an independent. And I hear that there's progress in the House for a bipartisan bill coming that's actually going to have D's and R's on it. So it's underway, and I think one of the things that's helping us here is that there's a feeling that the traditional tools for regulatory reform aren't working very well. It is cost-benefit analysis. I can help you assess the impact of a particular rule, an individual rule, but it really can't capture the interaction effect of too many rules that, again, are overlapping and duplicative. So we think, and retroactive review has not proved to be very effective. Every president tells the agencies that created these rules to go back and undo them. It almost never happens in any large-scale way. Lastly, this is critical to growth. Entrepreneurs are crying out for it. Surveys of them put regulatory relief at the top of their list. And we think there's a big headwind coming from the business and entrepreneurial community for this.
All right, so let's bring it on.
So just quick, if you could remind me of the history, because base closing was a while ago, and my recollection was it was known they were going to get closed, so you needed to have a vehicle of how you're going to close them as a point one. Secondly, the political environment is very different now, just generally. I'm not saying it was a golden age of bipartisanship then, but it is absolutely now. I mean, Erskine Bowles would have been the other great analogy, but effectively no one listened to them when they did it. So can you talk about this environment now and how this can really work in any kind of powerful way?
Yeah, well, look, the Base Closing Commission came out in 1990, but remember that was bread and butter for members. That was huge. These are properties, around which for decades interest had grown, and this was really politically difficult for them to do. They knew they would need a mechanism to take it out of the political arena, have independent experts assess, and then come back to them for the up or down votes, just like fast track. It's the only way we get anything passed in normal times in Washington. I don't want to understate the political difficulty of doing anything now, But when I talk to Republicans, they like this because, again, it doesn't require prior philosophical agreement on ultimate questions about the proper scope and role of public regulation. And it gives you a controlled way, a low-risk way from their point of view, partisans on both sides, to go after rules that have been identified by a broad community of stakeholders as being particularly egregious, particularly costly, or obsolete. You know, I think we can create a safe space where we can begin, again, to trim and not do things on a radically large scale, but build trust gradually as we go along with each round, hoping that the political base for this will
But I'm
widen.
sorry, but even if they believe in the process, do you feel comfortable that they'll actually act on the process? That was a Simpson Bowles shocker to me. It was handed to them, you know, with the keys, and they were rejected.
Well, I do think there is an appetite on both sides of the, excuse me, both sides of the aisle for doing something to lighten the burden on entrepreneurs, on innovators, on business, because they're hearing it. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you're hearing that from the people back in your district and from businesses. So yeah, I think there's real political pressure, and what we need, again, is a politically trustworthy and safe way to do this that's manageable, that neither side think will slip beyond their control.
I'm curious whether there's any kind of international case study, best practice. Is this being done abroad? And would that provide any lessons on how I think you said the 8 members of this committee would be chosen, how you would insulate them from the money culture, and how you'd also make sure that what they're looking at makes the most strategic sense in terms of the way regulation fits together across different industries and sectors?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any international precedents for this, and this need to go to commission seems to be a peculiarly American way of trying to solve problems that is rooted in the checks and balances and the separations of power in our system, which are huge. So I don't know about foreign precedents. We're not, but the base closing precedent suggests you have the Congress and the president will divvy up who appoints how many members of this commission. They'll borrow staff. They can get staff from the federal agencies, perhaps from the Hill. So it's not an expensive proposition, and it's time limited. You authorize them for one round, and if it works, you can authorize for another round. If it doesn't, you don't reauthorize. We think that this model has proven. It's fresh in their memories on the Hill. They know that this can work, and so we're hoping that that'll carry us a long way toward getting bipartisan support for it.
Just for disclosure, I oversaw one of the BRAC processes.
Oh my God.
I disagree with your I disagree with your sense of the givens, and let me tell you why. The reason, in my view, the reason the BRAC process works is, one, there's a metric, there's a budget number associated with the bases that are closed. 2, the Department of Defense gets to keep the money because it's included in the envelope. 3, therefore, the Department of Defense is wildly in favor of doing this. They put hundreds of analysts on this. And 4, actually the dynamic in Congress is quite different. What Congress wants is a way to defend themselves against the claims of the individuals whose base is going to be closed. They don't much give a damn whether the base is closed or not. They want a way of defending themselves against the claims. Please vote against. What's the metric in your proposal? In whose benefit is this specifically? I mean, it doesn't convince anybody that because it might be in the benefit of the country.
Right. That's always the conundrum. I think that the open source system for surfacing the rules that ought to be grappled with will identify large and potent constituencies for reform and change. These are industries that have chafed under a particular burden of one rule or some interaction of rules that has produced palpable costs for them. Will be pushing strongly for action. This creates a kind of a neutral arena in which these kinds of petitions for relief really can be presented. And the problem with the existing mechanism again is that we're asking the agencies which did to sort of reverse engineers the rules that they created, and they're still going to have to be responsive to the interests that have grown up around those rules on both sides. So, I take your point. The benefits are diffuse. The constituencies aren't as well organized, and certainly as, we're not going to be able to score immediate savings to the Treasury. But if we agree that this growth rate in the United States is too low, and that the private sector entrepreneurship needs to be unleashed, I think this will, we'll be able to win support for, again, a modest-scaled effort to start in reducing regs.
Giving you a couple extra seconds, what first two issues that come to mind that you would want this commission to take on and take a look at?
I don't know. We're more interested in not taking on certain areas. We've said, let's not, for example, go after the most fraught and polarized areas. Let's not go after environmental regulation first. Let's go after the occupational rules, things that are sort of, that have been percolated. There's been a lot of complaint about. There's a long record, from the aggrieved industries that suffer under them. And let's not go toward the most fraught areas of debate, which are most divisive and polarizing at first. So we'd almost sort of, again, we don't know what the right answer is. Let's let the industries, let's let the stakeholders tell us what they should be.
Perfect. All right, Megan, you're up. So Megan McArdle from Bloomberg is going to share with us a back-to-work program.
Yes, having just written a book on failure, I then, of course, immediately thought of what the biggest failure of American society is, which is the disconnection of a substantial part of our human capital supply from the labor market. And Donald has spoken really well about the way that we're disconnecting ourselves from foreign labor supply, but we also have a real problem at home between incarceration and long-term unemployment, where we've got roughly a third of our unemployed people have been out and seem to be so scarred that they cannot get hired again. And why is this about entrepreneurship, right? Well, first of all, this is the labor supply for your companies. Second of all, if you, this is the fundamental argument of my book, is if you want to increase risk-taking and failure, you have to lower the price of that. And what is the big risk right now is that you will end up without a job and unable to get back into the labor market because something terrible has happened. And so what I am proposing is I guess I'm now moving on to the next.
Go for it.
So here's my proposal, is that we give employers basically a month-for-month tax credit for employing people, payroll tax rebate for employing people who have been out of the labor market. So for every month that this person's been out of the labor market, and I don't care whether they were in prison, whether they were a mother who took time off, or whether they were unemployed, for every month they've been out, you get 100% of their payroll tax rebated, half to the employee, half to the. So what does this do? First of all, it makes labor cheaper, which is something that is good for entrepreneurs, also something that is good for the people who need to get reemployed in a time where this is very difficult. The second thing it does is it's time limited, right? It's connected to, you now have an actual incentive to go out and seek out people who have been unemployed for a while, instead of saying no unemployed people need apply, which is something that we're seeing a great deal of. And it also diffuses a lot of the political issues that surround this, because when you have these disconnections from the labor market, what do you see in the kind of political economy side? That is that you start getting pressure for regulations that make it harder to hire, harder to fire. Regulations that taxes have to go up to support these people on some sort of program. I mean, there's a broad political economy effects of this that actually percolate through all the way through to businesses. But the biggest issue is a potential entrepreneur should be in the labor force, learning what they're doing. So, and an entrepreneur who wants to hire should have access to labor that isn't, in this basket that is, I can't hire this person because God knows what the hell they've been doing for the last 5 years, right? So that's the broad proposal. How do you get it done is the last difficulty. But I actually think that this is, of all of the things, you may not vote for other reasons, it's the easiest thing to get done, right? You look at what's the constituency for this. It's a wage subsidy, which Democrats love, and it's a tax cut, which Republicans love. And so, attach this to an economic growth package. This should be one of the easier things to get through even our current completely dysfunctional, polarized, bad marriage Congress. And hopefully, get some people back to work. The cost looks like, if you sort of max it out, you estimate that every single long-term unemployed people plus some people in prison get hired at the average wage, and that you're not saving anything on your unemployment or your disability or other things that, or Social Security or other things that people go on. Cost is about $30 billion. But it's a one-time cost, right? Once you get someone back into the labor force, they then have access to further jobs. They can get hired out of a company rather than hired out of the pool of unemployed, which is the right place that you want to be to go to the next. And you know, similarly on the other side, you've got companies that are able to grow and pay taxes and do more things because they've got that labor supply available.
All right, questions from
Shall I start? Sure. So really interesting idea. I'm curious about the wage issue and the cost of labor, which in the U.S. is actually relatively low right now by global standards, at least in per unit costs. And to what extent the long-term employed issue is really about labor cost, and to what extent it is about a group of people that do not have the skills to get hired right now. And to that effect, can you break down a little bit who is in that group,
Sure.
the ages, and who we're talking about?
So here's why I think that this actually addresses the problem that we have, and there's two reasons for that. The first is that what we see from studies is that when you send out a resume that has more than a 6-month gap on it, you just can't get that person a call back. And it's not got to do with what skills are on that resume. It's got to do with employers who are just afraid to touch that person. And you know, there actually is research that shows that people, when they're out of the labor market, they get depressed and they start losing skills. And some of these things are really basic skills, like reading and writing and like basic arithmetic. So that's part of it, is you're actually, when people are in work, they're preserving skill base. They're preserving everything from client contacts to, you know, at the high end, to just the ability to show up, not be depressed, not be anxious and worried all the time. So that's one side of it. You know, the other side is that when you look at people who are out of work, a lot of them don't lower what's called their reservation wage, right? They should be taking less pay. They can't get over the fact that they used to get paid more. And so they don't lower their wage as much as they should have. And that's really dangerous, especially in this job market, right? It's extremely dangerous, but it's very hard for people to do. So what are we doing with this? We're basically we're placing a 15% sort of wage subsidy there, part from the employer side, part on the employee side. But that enables people, maybe I have to take a 30% wage cut in order to get rehired, keep in the workforce, et cetera. I can't bring myself emotionally to do it. Maybe I could do a 15% cut.
I'd love to pull a string where she was going, because I think you answered about half of her question, but the other one I'm still a little stuck on. Because you even said that the issue fundamentally is kind of a sense of reliability and skills. And your answer is cost. And so I'm trying to get an understanding, if employers are really hesitant because they think that there may be a reliability issue and or a skill issue or an engagement issue,
Sure.
Why do you think at the end of the day that this cost will give them a willingness to do that versus the other people that are available to them?
Well, right, because you're always calculating on the margin, right? Is this person going to generate as much for me as I have to pay them in order to get them here? If you lower what you have to pay them, then even someone who may have slightly degraded skills, essentially like what I'm
Do you have
arguing.
evidence of that? Have you seen any study or anything that would help say that that end becomes the fundamental driver of that decision?
Well, what we know is that people do care about wages, right? Like what we actually do know is there is research showing that this reservation wage problem is a big issue for both the employer and the employee side. People, like, we're not matching workers to what employers are willing to pay them.
Interesting. Thank you.
I guess I have. The overall impression is you're aimed at the right target. There's just so many possible questions. But I think you're wrong about it being a one-time cost. I think that if you keep this in effect, it's an annual cost for that. So you're looking, so its cost is whatever the present discounted value is of a stream of 30 billion over a long period of time. And it's a real cost, because since you've cut the taxes, you have to score, in the scoring, the way we score today is that you have to find an offset.
Right.
And that offset is, the way the rules in fact really work, it doesn't necessarily have to be a tax you're going to raise it, but it has to be a tax or an expenditure. So you've got this quite enormous sum, and it's real money. If you actually had that, and I was thinking I was going to get a piece of paper and write down that and hand it to you, is this how you'd spend it?
Yes, actually, I really do think this is how I would spend it for a bunch of reasons. I mean, look, you know, hysteresis is a real issue. It's people who get knocked off the job ladder and then just get stuck at a lower level, even though they have the potential to be doing better. And the only way so far that we seem to have found to fix that problem is to have World War II, which is how we fixed it after the Great Depression, right? So we're not going to do, thank God, right? We're not going to do that, but this is a national emergency. Unemployment is basically the worst thing that can happen to you. If you look at studies of happiness and how people report to reacting to events, 5 years after someone has been widowed or had a divorce or so forth, they're basically as happy as they were. Someone who's unemployed is still basically just as unhappy as they were when they lost their job. They don't habituate. So that's part of it. I mean, also the economic problems of having people on disability, on welfare, on retiring early, when we have all of these budget crises, our labor supply is about to be the prime constraint on our economic growth as we head into the demographic transition. We should be boosting our labor supply as much as possible, both to keep our entitlements solvent, but also because these are human beings who are suffering horrifyingly. And so, just from a sheer, as a public policy question, yes, I think that unemployment is the greatest crisis facing America right now, and we should be addressing it. I also think that that if we want to have, as the labor supply constraints, we need to be doing more entrepreneurship, more productivity, more growth. And the first step is getting the labor force in there
What's so interesting
and
is you're not
restoring
just
these
going after
people.
unemployment, which is unbelievably powerfully spoken. You're actually going after the people who drop out of the unemployment numbers. I mean,
Yes.
these are people who are no longer counted because, quote unquote, they're no longer looking for a job.
Exactly.
So
You're
you're a
about to end.
twofer in a way, which is quite
About to
interesting.
end.
And the incarcerated, who are
that's
one of, being incarcerated is effectively sort of an employment death sentence. And yet, if you talk to people in the probation system and they're trying to get people employed, it's surprisingly easy because you say, here's someone who's not allowed to drink, has to show up for work on time or he's going back to jail. They're quite actually attractive for employers, but once they get out of that system, employers don't want them anymore. And that is a national crisis, especially in our cities.
I didn't ask my question in the right way. I didn't mean of all the possible ills in the world, is this the one you'd aim at? What I meant was, you now have a real piece of money. Would you spend it on long-term unemployed this way if you didn't have to do it through a tax reduction method?
Yes, because you can think about doing something like a WPA type program, right? And I'm not averse to that. But I think there are some issues with it. Structurally, if you look at when the WPA happened, this is a time when the economy, there's a lot of guys whose skill is moving heavy stuff, right? And that's just less and less true. And so getting a kind of broad-based, if you came to me and told me, we can do a temporary program pegged to the labor force participation rate, it'll close down when it drops, when it gets to where we want it to be, and we're going to hire 5 million people, and we're going to do that, right? I would support that program, but I don't think you can do it partly because finding jobs for those people is really difficult, and partly because of the political economy. It takes forever to get anything even if you thought you could get the political constituency for it, getting it through and staffed up and through environmental review and all the rest of it and dealing with the public sector unions, it's a whole different ballgame than it was in 1933. So yes, this is the best way that I can think of to spend the money because feasibility was one of the constraints, right? It has to be something that we could actually pass.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break here because you can start voting now, Kauffman.org/SOE2014. And we're going to switch to some audience questions. There are 2 mics circulating. Please wait for the mic to reach you because most of the folks that are hearing today are watching from the internet and some other networks. And while we wait for those mics, let me ask you, Megan, how do you deal with the skills gap, not necessarily matching what these folks who have dropped out of the labor market actually possess, the skills they possess?
The skills gap is tough because government training programs just don't have a good record. You look at them, it's not, again, that I'm against trying it, but we seem to have run that experiment about 1 million times and gotten nowhere with it. The government's not good at predicting where people are going to go. But you know what? If the jobs are out there, people will motivate to train themselves for the jobs if those skills are there. And again, a lot of it is the price of labor. The problem isn't that, I can't get skilled machinists. The problem is I can't get skilled machinists for the $8 an hour that I need to pay them in order to compete with China. So again, especially for those skills, as we upskill the workforce, and I think company that's starting, I think insourcing really is a thing. I think that I'm actually a little more bullish on the long-term American labor market than I think a lot of people are. But we're in a period right now where in order to keep people connected and upskilling, they need to be in work. And so, let's make those wages at the bottom a little bit more competitive with China.
All right. Who's got our microphones?
Thank you. I have a question related to both the startup visa and the EB-5 program, and thinking about how do you marry the two to make them both more effective. EB-5 is really geared towards real estate projects and has not been administered effectively, and really doesn't have real effective intermediaries throughout the country. What if you took the EB-5 program, created a startup component to it with part of the pool of money that's available there, linked it to the startup visa program, and had a more effective agency or intermediary to administer it, have milestones established for the startup visas, have the money that came from the EB-5 program, part of it, go into the early stage, high-risk entrepreneurial ventures for these immigrant entrepreneurs who are going to get startup visas, and the way that they maintain and keep those visas is by achieving the milestones related to jobs and progression in their companies that they want to start up in America.
All right, Donald.
That was complicated. So just so I understand, so the idea is roughly, so the EB-5, as I understand it, the basic idea is that the potential immigrant is the investor and can put up the capital, correct? Right, and so the idea of a startup visa is actually the potential entrepreneur who maybe doesn't have any capital whatsoever, who needs to be matched with that in order to create a new opportunity here in the United States. My first reaction is, that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, but my second reaction, though, is that very often what you want when you raise money as an entrepreneur is not just the money literally, but you want the network and the contacts and the skills and the insight that come with the person who's investing in you. And my concern would be that that matching would be difficult through the proposal that you just raised, in that there wouldn't necessarily be a good match between the potential tech guy who's a graduating student who wants to start something and the potential real estate investor who's got the $1 million and wants to come here. And that really what you want to encourage is the tech guy to match up with investors who have tech skills.
That's part of the vetting process.
Microphone, we'll repeat it. Go ahead. Bring it on.
I was just saying that's part of the vetting process. If you have the appropriate people doing the vetting of the opportunities, those people are the ones who are involved in the network already that understand technologists, investors, and other organizations that could add value to the startup which you're talking about. And if you had the right people doing the vetting of these opportunities for the people to invest in, that solves part of that problem. So you get higher quality deal flow.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts? No. Okay. Let's go to our next question.
Hi, I'm Ruth Hayes from the Jedi Institute, and Megan, I really liked your proposal, and I wanted to tie that in. I lived in Europe for many years, and I get the sense in the United States we often sort of throw away the long-term unemployed. It's very hard for them to get back in. In countries like the Netherlands, there's always this attempt to reintroduce people to workforce, and if you're unemployed, part of the issue is your mindset, your depression. In the Netherlands, you actually have a right to vacation when you're unemployed, to keep you in that loop of feeling like an active citizen, even though you don't have a job. But my question to you is, and I wonder if you thought about this, I'm sure you have, that employers could game the system. And that could also lead to these individuals feeling like, oh, so I get another job for another few months till the benefits run out, and then they cut me again.
So what I like about this system is that you have to be, the worker has to be unemployed for a certain rate. You only get the benefit for as long as you were unemployed. And it's not really very effective for most people to say, well, I'm going to take 9 months off and then I'll get a 15% raise and then I'm going to take, because you're still missing, right? You're effectively, even with that 15% raise, you're only getting 15% of your salary for the other amount of time that you were off. And unemployment benefits, they're fine replacement if you make minimum wage, but they're not in the United States very good replacement anywhere. I will say in response to your other remark, like unemployment makes people unhappy anywhere. The survey I was actually citing is from Germany, and it was done during a period when, incredibly, right? You're a steel worker, spend 10 years looking for work, we'll pay 90% of your salary. It's just, it disconnects you from like one of the things that we spend most of our waking hours doing, and from all of the coworkers and the community and the kind of place in society. It's just a really dreadful thing for the people, but it's also an enormous drag on society to have that human capital loss. And in Europe as well, they've struggled to get people back into work. They do a better job at palliating the unemployment, but in most cases actually a worse job of actually moving people back into work quickly, in part because the unemployment is less unpleasant. It's a really difficult trade-off for policymakers.
But you were suggesting employers could game it as well, or were you just, yeah, that's what I thought she was really asking.
Well, it's hard to see how you game it, right? You need a supply of people who've been unemployed for a long time.
The incarcerated, for example, the incarcerated. So
Right.
you probably have a pretty large pool.
We have a huge pool of
Yes,
formerly
and so
incarcerated
you
people.
could, vis-a-vis your employer, hire them in till the benefits run out, and then you cut them and you hire another incarcerated, and you just have this pool running in. And then you could, I don't know if you'd argue, then they get some experience, but they're not actually being offered really a long-term strategy. So.
Looking at how bad labor markets out, I mean, I think that it's less of a general problem for the long-term unemployed. Looking at how bad labor market outcomes are for the incarcerated, if someone's going to hire someone who's been incarcerated for 5 years and then fire them at the end, I'll take that deal, because right now they're not even getting hired for the period. I mean, it's really, and it's devastating to communities where you have whole huge swaths of men who are just functionally unable to pull any sort of market wage in any legal activity. And so, like, yes, you could see employers doing that, but even if they did, I mean, that is, especially with incarcerated, a bargain that I would leap on with both feet.
We've got 10 more minutes to vote. Does somebody have a question? Maybe about regulation reform?
Oh, yeah. Steve Tellis, Johns Hopkins University. I have a question for Will. The thing as a political scientist I'm trying to figure out is why you think the commission structure will create any kind of different interest group relationship to this process than the regular political process will, right? That is, firms, are still complaining about this before you set up this commission, right? They're going to be coming and making the same complaints after you set up the commission, right? It seems like there's only two possible theories whereby this changes anything, right? One is the institutional rules somehow allow actors to make decisions they wouldn't have before, right? And the process somehow causes groups who were underrepresented in the process before to be more represented after. So can you tell me which of those is likely to have any effect? That is, either the people making the decisions are going to be more free to make decisions they weren't before, or the voices of the people who are less represented are going to be louder than they were in the other process?
Well, I think that this structure, if you put it together right, and it could be put together wrong, if you had arch libertarians and hyper-regulators appointed to the commission, you'd be recreating some of the problems that you're trying to avoid here. But if it was constructed right, it would be a less politicized arena in which these petitions for relief could be presented and arguments could be made. You're also not running running the analysis through some of the usual devices like cost-benefit analysis necessarily, because again, you're looking at the cumulative effect of many rules and not just the isolated effects of individual rules. But the most important point is that you have a device for insulating politicians from the consequences of their actions. In the up or down vote, in the package, the aggregate package that you put together to present to Congress for an up or down vote. And I think that our supposition here is that if we approach this gradually, if we again create a kind of a succession of rounds in which trust building happens, and stakeholders can see that this is a process that's not tilted fundamentally against their interests, one that needs to be torpedoed, it can endure.
Going over here.
Yeah, I'm sorry you can't see me.
You can't see Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Lighton, and former Kauffman and currently with Bloomberg government, so I've got conflicts on both sides. And so I'm going to ask Megan a question.
Go easy on me.
Huh?
Go easy on me. We're colleagues.
I know that. I know that. So I'll start out by saying I like your idea. The second thing I'll say is the good news is it won't cost $30 billion. It's going to be a lot lower than that because a lot fewer people, I think, will actually benefit from this. And the reason is twofold, and I like your comment. On the demand side, if you're thinking about firms, and they get a 15% basically wage cut, all right? First, you've got the huge skills mismatch problem, and I know a gazillion startups right now, and I don't know of a single startup that would actually run out and hire somebody, a long-term unemployed person, when they're looking for somebody with very specific Excel skills or IT skills or whatever, because that's basically what all startups are looking for. And even established firms, it's very uncertain about whether or how many people they would employ if you cut wages by 15%. So that's on the demand side. And on the supply side, you've got all these discouraged workers out there. And so simply announcing the program doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden any of them are going to suddenly start looking for work and join the labor force. And so all this is to say, I don't think there'll be that many people that will actually benefit. But on the other hand, the good thing is I think it's an experiment that's worth running because we have really no good idea of the elasticity of the responses in either direction, and we won't know until we run the program. But it won't be $30 billion, Bo, I can guarantee you that. And it will be an annual cost. But one thing to deduct from the annual cost, whatever, is that for some number of those workers are going to be more than minimum wage workers. They may be middle income workers, and we're going to get tax receipts back from those. So there's going to be, the net cost is going to be a lot lower than the 15%. So there's a long way of saying, I think this is an idea that it's one of those experiments that we should run and find out.
I think that's actually a great point, and I think that when you would run it, you would actually get a lot of interesting information that would influence the minimum wage debate as well.
Yes, it tells you a lot about, I mean, in some ways, the political economy of the minimum wage debate is weird to me right now. Mm-hmm. We've got terrible labor force participation, and somehow we want to raise wages and hope that it doesn't depress demand still further. Look, I think we were asked to give the cost. I gave the highest cost I could think of, right? But you have to net out income taxes for people in middle income. You have to net out disability, which is a huge thing of people going on a long-term disability when it's been a year and a half and I can't find work, unemployment benefits and so forth. So I do think that the net cost is lower. I agree with you. We have no idea. I have no idea, no way to project what the effect of this would be in terms of how many people would benefit. But the great thing, as you also point out, is that the cost is completely pegged to how many people participate, right? If we try it and no one takes us up on this, well, then we lost nothing. And if we try it and it's hugely expensive, well, the reason it's hugely expensive is that employers went on a hiring binge. We took a bunch of people who were not working and who were losing skills and losing the country, human capital, and we put them back to work. So either way, it just seems like a good deal to me.
And your high number is 30 million?
30 billion.
Billion.
But it isn't a recurring cost, right? Because in the future years, right, some people will come out of prison, but it spikes in the beginning, and then it goes down to something more. And I have no idea because again, we don't know the elasticity.
Coalition. Question for Megan. And Megan, I think you're right. I think this is the biggest problem facing the country. And you're in good company. Paul Krugman of the New York Times and others agree with you. Two questions. One is there was criticism about payroll reductions in the payroll tax about the drain on Social Security. So have you thought that through? And secondly, has this been an experiment that hasn't been done? I mean, has there been overseas, other countries, have they tried this similar approach, and what were the results?
Well, we have a slightly weird, the way that our Social Security contributions are structured is different. Like other countries have experimented with reforming their Social Security payroll deductions. We're not the only place who have them, but it generally comes in the context of we did 90 things to the tax system at once, and so it's a bit hard to say. Yes, there is the issue of, I mean, from my perspective as someone who writes about the budget, I mean, I think that's absurd, right? We're not going to, Social Security benefits are not ultimately very closely pegged to what's in the Social Security trust fund, if you think there's a trust fund, right? It's pegged to the fact that we don't want to cut benefits for a bunch of very large and very politically powerful group. And so those benefits are going to get paid or they're not going to get paid, and whether we rebate the payroll tax cut or not is sort of irrelevant. The political economy of it can be tricky, but actually I think this is something the AARP may really like, because in fact, who is a group that has a huge problem with getting to work and being, when people over 50 lose jobs, they're out of work for much longer. And this is not people who are taking early retirement. This is people who want to go back to work and cannot get someone to hire them. This is effectively, for those people who are struggling in the labor market, a slight wage subsidy for, hey, take a chance on a 50-year-old worker, instead of saying, oh, well, they probably don't have any skills and they can't learn anything. And so I think that you can onboard the AARP on this if you frame it right. And overall, again, I think Larry Summers and Brad DeLong did some work suggesting that because of hysteresis, because when you lose a worker, you seem to lose them permanently. We don't know what happens to someone who's been out of work for 5 years and tries to get back in the absence of something like the 1990s boom or World War II, that it is quite theoretically possible that these sorts of programs over the long run can pay for themselves, because instead of having someone who is dependent and not in the labor force, you ultimately, by pulling them back in, create a taxpayer. That's basically what we did with World War II. I'm not going to say World War II paid for itself. It didn't, but it definitely, that repair of the labor market that happened when unemployment dropped down to like 3% was a major factor in the boom that came afterwards.
So, voting, it's about to close. Hopefully you've already voted, and if you haven't yet, vote right now. We're just waiting for me to get the slip with your audience favorite. But with that, why don't we switch to you guys to give your closing thoughts on your pick and why?
I personally picked Megan's. I agree with Bob that it's an experiment worth running. I find the political science aspects of the regulatory BRAC to be hard to overcome. I think Will is aiming at a really, really important topic, and regulatory sclerosis has been a big deal. I just don't. I read the political dynamics differently, and this is not a trivial point about it couldn't pass. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think that the Defense Department BRAC worked quite well for very, very special reasons. I like the idea of a startup visa, so I personally was very sympathetic toward it, but I find the selection issues to be daunting.
All right.
So I'm fascinated by all of these proposals. I'm torn between Donald and Megan, although I'm also very interested in the regulatory issues. I'll just share a quick anecdote. I was recently reporting a story in Illinois and came across a mid-level manufacturer who was trying to build a factory to manufacture a certain kind of, or to use a certain kind of paint in a certain part of the state, and there was a law around building a factory of a certain size, so he just built two like 5 miles away from each other, which I think underscores your point. But I think, Megan, you are completely right in terms of focusing on long-term unemployment as the meta issue. I mean, I just think it's huge. I think we're in danger of creating a lost generation. I'm really worried about that issue. I'm a little less convinced that this is fixable via wages versus it being kind of a core skills issue and how to loop training into that. I wish we lived in Germany, but we don't, although I'm watching really carefully what's happening in Chattanooga with VW, and I hope they pass that Works Council. So I think I'm going to go with Donald, because I think that getting more immigrants into this country and helping them start businesses is just low-hanging fruit. I've never seen any economic argument against immigration really at any level of the spectrum. I mean, I think it's interesting that we always focus on the high end, but there's actually plenty of data to show that it supports the economy at the low end as well. So,
let me just say, I've just loved this hour like nothing I can tell you. I mean, this is an amazing conversation. Maybe this stuff is happening in Washington all the time. but I haven't sat in anything like this before. And in a town which has it to an art form to deconstruct 10 reasons why you can't do anything for the one reason why you can, I just think this is fantastic, and a huge tribute to Kauffman to do this and to put it in this context and bring you guys together. So I just think it's been a blast overall. I mean, you know, immigration reform, I'm the grandson of immigrants. I have pushed on H-1B visas as much as anyone I know. I mean, this is unbelievably important to one of our great competitive advantages was innovation and just the kind of nation that we are overall. Regulatory reform is unbelievably powerful and necessary in every level. I mean, and of course, structural employment. You've got the big three here, and all of it can be pursued, I think, in different ways with different kinds of experimentation. I come down with you because I love the idea of experimenting something that hasn't been done before, and I thought your answers to a lot of the things were really incredibly well rendered. I mean, I think that there are things going on in the immigration debate that you could help have great influence on, and there are things in the regulatory reform side of it, which if you find the right members of the Senate and House, these things can move forward. I hate to pick one, but the idea to experiment in something to raise these in very different areas, I think is fascinating, and so I would vote your way.
Well, while we await our results, I'll add that one of the things that I found interesting is we didn't talk a lot about job multiplier effects. It was something where we all acknowledge that jobs are at issue here, and that's also how we're most likely to find reform. But certainly I'm biased toward startup visa and trying to get that right, because we do know that when you bring those immigrants in and you help them start companies, that you're talking about, 4.3 other jobs on average we're creating, and that then creates all sorts of other mobility. We know that those are everyone from accountants to bus boys and so on and so forth. So certainly if we're looking to how to engage our workforce very broadly, very compelling. But yes, the selection problem is exceptionally difficult, and I think what we're finding ourselves in now is a circumstance where we've got these visa examiners who are trying to determine the validity of the H-1B applicants' companies and whether or not these are legitimate businesses, and that's a difficult position to put the examiners in, and I think it's a terrible position to put the entrepreneurs in. So very, very ripe for reform, because what we're doing now is sending folks away. And with that, I think we have our result. Thank you. And the winner by 12 votes, Will. Congratulations.
Isn't that interesting?
Surprise.
Very exciting. Would you?
Do I have to give a speech?
Absolutely. Victor's remarks.
You can take a victory song.
Please, come on.
No, thank you very much.
What do we need to do to help you now?
Well, let me just say one other thing that I didn't say about this proposal that I should have said in answer to these very good questions. There's another element that's important, and that is restoring confidence in government. You know, 19% of the public thinks government can do the right thing part of the time, or but not all the time, or most of the time. And this is a particular problem for progressives, because we have to convince people that because we believe in political activism, because we believe government can do things, including things that are going to make the economy work better, we've got to convince them that we can also take this sludge of rules and regulations and obsolete laws and help people get out from under it and give them a better field for competition and innovation and entrepreneurship. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much to our Wonks for sharing their ideas today and all time. Thank you to our judges as well, and thank you to Tom and Dane and Barb and all of the folks at Kauffman for putting this together. As a reminder, you can find the full State of Entrepreneurship address as well as a very shortly edited video from today available at Kauffman.org. And if you're so inclined, you can stick around for another event that my organization, Engine, is hosting, being led off by Gene Sperling of the White House, looking at some of these economic indicators that we all talked about around entrepreneurship, and then one of the regulations that all startups hate talking about but must, patent trolls. So that begins just around the corner in a few minutes. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks.
I love your guys.
And
I'll send you a couple things.
This is really retain immigration attorneys, and all they do are work with our startups all day.